no, this is not an administration of peace. This is an administration that is pursuing, I'd say, multiple and contradictory approaches to American foreign policy.
So recently, Jeffrey Sachs went on Judging Freedom, that's Andrew Napolitano's podcast, and he talked a little bit about how he believes Trump is abandoning some of the America First non-interventionist rhetoric that he used on the campaign trail. As far as I see it, he's one of the greatest analysts in the world on foreign policy, so I want to check this out. Let's watch and let's react to it.
How do you account for the bellicosity, and maybe this is related to economics, I don't know, of Prime Minister Starmer, President Macron, Ursula von der Leyen toward Russia?
I think, in a sense, it's unaccountable because it's profoundly irresponsible. I would say with the British, it is a long tradition of Russophobia, a tradition that actually dates back almost 2 centuries. After all, Britain fought the first Crimean War, essentially like our current Ukraine war, which I call the Second Crimean War. That was a war in which the British Empire fought Russia to try to push Russia out of the Black Sea region because the British Empire thought that Russia was a competitor. And the British concocted fairy tales about the Russian intention to invade British India, the so-called Great Game of Central Asia. So for Britain, a kind of craziness goes back a long time. Starmer is utterly irresponsible, talking about war, talking about planes in the sky, boots on the ground, in a way which could get a lot of people killed, including his countrymen. Totally reckless.
Yeah, Jeffrey Sachs is right on the money here. A lot of the European kind of overtures and invocations of helping Ukraine, boots on the ground, planes in the air, like he's talking about, are just empty threats that aren't going to come to fruition. There's not public support for that there, not that that always dissuades government, but they're relying on the U.S. to treat Ukraine like a de facto NATO power, and always have been for the past few years. And Russophobia, it goes back a long way like he talks about, but it actually doesn't go back that far in the U.S. because after the Cold War, there was an easing of tensions generally in terms of the American perceptions toward Russia until the Americans got propagandized back into it, of course. But even in 2012, you saw Barack Obama, complain that Mitt Romney's foreign policy was way too anti-Russia. He famously said, the Cold War is calling, it wants its foreign policy back. And really, Putin didn't become persona non grata again until he denied the U.S. a regime change in Syria. And when it became known that the U.S. was not going to be able to do a regime change in Syria in the early 2010s, that's when people started to talk differently about Putin. Remember, George Bush said he looked into the eyes and he saw an honest man in Putin. And, well, that doesn't stick when it comes to military prowess and denying the U.S. its expansion of empire.
Macron, I have to say, I know him personally, and I just find him inconsistent. I've spoken with him about these issues and heard in private things that are different from what he says in public. I really resent that when we're dealing with life and death issues. And so I think to an extent, they're politicians being politicians. Of course, von der Leyen based her whole presidency of the European Commission on war with Russia. She also tried to become head of NATO, which says a lot because NATO and the European Union became so hopelessly intertwined that one could not distinguish the one from the other. And
Hmm.
this was another reason why even issues like Ukraine's participation in the European Union got totally entangled with the US led military alliance. All in all, it's to say that European positions, to my mind, make no sense. I've told European leaders that for years. They have succeeded in getting Ukraine to the point of destruction, and they continue on in this way. So I can't give you a real answer because
No, this is a good, this is a great history
I
lesson.
regard all of it as so utterly irrational and dangerous and irresponsible that it is hard to account.
You see the European powers operate and act much like Israel does, knowing that it's the US that are bankrolling these wars. In terms of Israel's war in Gaza and in Syria and in Lebanon, the Israeli government does and says things that it wouldn't otherwise do without that backing. And I think you're seeing that with the European powers as well. They're talking a big game about, confronting Putin and, all this stuff about, how he's going to reconstitute a USSR and things like that. That is utter nonsense and not backed by tangible evidence, because it's the US bankrolling this war, this brinksmanship with Russia in a new Cold War.
Coming to this side of the Atlantic, the president of the United States, who says he wants to be a president of peace, last weekend bombed the Houthis, who are 10,000 miles away from us and pose no threat whatsoever to the national security of the United States, 65 times in 48 hours. And he sent B-52s, the largest bombing jets we have, to ostentatiously fly around the Indian Ocean. What's with his bellicosity?
Look, people should understand we have three conflict zones in the world right now involving the United States. One is Ukraine. The second is Israel's wars in the Middle East. I'll call them wars because Israel is in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, in Syria. And the United States is right there with Israel on everything, including, as you say, the bombing of Yemen and the threats to bomb Iran. The third conflict area, so far a Cold War, if you could put it that way, is with China. But there too, the administration's rhetoric is utterly bellicose, talking about preparing for possible coming war in most irresponsible and reckless ways.
I truly believe that the right is as absurd when it comes to China as the establishment left is when it comes to Russia, in terms of viewing it as such an existential threat. This is another nuclear power where the right should apply the same lessons that we know from the conflict in Ukraine to China, especially as it relates to Taiwan. The US should not be involved in these worldwide geopolitical struggles with nuclear powers. And that's as true when it comes to China as it is with Russia.
So I had hoped when Trump came into office that he would be a person of peace. I think what he's doing in Ukraine is positive and noteworthy, although a bit clumsy and inconsistent. What he's doing in the Middle East is doubling down on Israel's massacres and complete reckless behavior and war crimes and uh, venality and viciousness, the likes of which we have not seen for a very long time. And what is happening inside the administration, apparently, vis-a-vis China, is a lot of war talk, preparing for war. This is not Yet the public face, this is what is apparently being said in semi-private. There seems nothing to be completely private in this administration, but at least this is what the scuttlebutt in Washington is, that there's war talk, war drums beating vis-a-vis China. So no, this is not an administration of peace. This is an administration that is pursuing, I'd say, multiple and contradictory approaches to American foreign policy.
I think that's undeniable, and I think it is in three different respects. Number one, Trump rubber stamped the resumption of hostilities in Gaza. The ceasefire that he arranged, Netanyahu's decision to betray that, had to have been rubber stamped by its financier, headed by Trump's administration. Also, the bombing of Yemen, also on behalf of Israel. That was a war that Trump had the opportunity to end in his first term, but used one of his sole presidential vetoes to preserve. In Ukraine, I will concede, I'm glad that there's being discussions made with the Russians. That's, by all estimations, that is progress in terms of diplomatic relations and easing tensions, no doubt. But when Trump had unlimited political capital to withdraw all aid to Ukraine, which he did for a few days, he suddenly turned course on that and restored it over this hopeless ceasefire deal that Russia wasn't going to agree with in the first place. Russia's only agreed not to bomb energy infrastructure and vice versa. That is almost negligible in terms of its tangible effects. So it's hard to deny that Sachs is right on this one.
Certainly, by the way, when it comes to issues in the Western Hemisphere, there's no language of peace. The rhetoric about Canada is disgusting. The rhetoric about Greenland is as bellicose as it can get, to claim that another country or territory of another country is going to become America's. The rhetoric vis-a-vis much of South America is similar, in Central America regarding Panama and other countries. So this is not peace talk. This is all mixed up. But in Ukraine, okay, good progress to some extent. But in the rest of the world, a lot of bellicosity.
Yeah, I think Sachs is right on the money for the most part here. I think he's a little bit even more charitable toward Trump on Ukraine than I would be, because I see the resumption of status quo Biden administration right now in Ukraine, outside of being willing to talk to Russia. And again, I concede that's a major thing. But he's very right about Trump siding with the Israel lobby like many of us knew he would. I mean, he got $100 million for his campaign from Miriam Adelson, and that was guaranteed to produce some, Zionist and neocon outcomes that none of us wanted, regardless of his rhetoric on war. But the true America First position is, of course, not to get involved in these military clashes overseas, whether it be with nuclear powers or not. Siding with Israel every single time and continuing to side with Ukraine, siphoning money from the American taxpayer there when we have a $36 trillion debt is not America First. I think Sachs is right on the money here. When it comes to Greenland, Greenland can join as a 51st state if Congress approves it. I'm not a fan of that. But for Trump to kind of, utter bellicose verbiage that, essentially asserts that the U.S. military may be involved in that is just crazy. I don't think even his own party takes him seriously on that. But he's been able to cover it with humor and, the Gulf of America thing instead of Gulf of Mexico, which, hey, I'm all for that part. Not that I care that much, but there is a tint of humor there that I think hides some of his ambitions. So it's unfortunate to see what's happened with this administration in terms of foreign policy overall, I think. But I hold out hope that a peace may be coming in Ukraine, hopefully down the line. But I don't think the strategy that it will take to get to that point is being used yet. But what do you guys think? Is Trump a man of peace, or has he abandoned America First, non-interventionist principles? Let me know in the comments below. And please like this video, subscribe to the channel. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Take it easy, guys. Peace out.